Once upon a time in a faraway land called the Philippines, life was simple. People fished, ate Jollibee, and tried to avoid getting involved in superpower conflicts. Until one day, the world's two biggest geopolitical bullies, China and the US, realized it was the perfect place to start a war. Why? Because if history has taught us anything, it's that small countries make the best battlegrounds. And the Philippines? Well, they're stuck in the middle, hoping not to end up as the next Ukraine. The problem isn't just war, it's geography. Because geography is destiny, and the Philippines has some of the worst luck in the world. To the north, Taiwan, an island China claims as its own with tensions rising every day. To the west, the South China Sea, a body of water China believes it owns because it said so. To the east, the Pacific, where the US keeps its military bases watching everything unfold. It's like living in a neighborhood where your next-door neighbors are a guy who collects nuclear weapons, another guy who likes to start wars, and a landlord who randomly claims your house belongs to him. And if all of this wasn't bad enough, the Philippines also happens to sit on one of the busiest trade routes in the world. Over $3 trillion worth of goods pass through these waters every year, which means that if a conflict starts here, the global economy won't just slow down, it'll collapse. Before we dive into the who's and what's of the video, do remember to comment what topics would you like me to pick up and toss into a pan full of delicious drama? Cheers! So, who's the biggest player in this game? That would be China. China's approach to geopolitics is simple. If we can touch it, it's ours. Artificial islands, built military bases, operational Filipino fishing boats, rammed and harassed, and finally international law. Ignored. Beijing's goal is clear. Turn the South China Sea into a Chinese lake, control vital shipping lanes, and make sure any potential US intervention in Taiwan comes at a heavy cost. In case you're wondering how ridiculous this is, imagine if China drew a dotted line around your house and said, "This is ours now, we won't invade, unless you make us." And if anyone, like the Philippines, dares to complain, they get the same response. "We don't want war, but we will defend our territory that we made up last week." But where does that leave the United States? Well, America's been here before. Enter the United States, the world's self-appointed global police force, and like any good superhero, it only shows up when there's an opportunity for global domination. I mean, protecting democracy. Officially, the US has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines, meaning if China starts shooting, America has to step in. But here's the catch. They don't have to step in immediately. Because let's be honest, being America's ally is like being the side character in a horror movie. You get all the promises of safety, but when the monster shows up, you're on your own for the first 30 minutes. Right now, the US is doing what it does best. Deploying aircraft carriers, warning China not to do anything stupid and hoping for the best. If this sounds familiar, it's because we've seen it before. Remember Ukraine? Remember when everyone swore Russia would never actually invade? It's just posturing, they said. Putin wouldn't dare, they said. Fast forward to today. Ukraine is in ruins, millions are displaced, and the world's superpowers are using it as a weapons testing ground. Now China is doing the same thing. It's testing the waters, probing defenses, and seeing how much it can get away with. But don't worry, world leaders assure us that diplomacy will prevail. Translation: we have no idea what we're doing, but we're hoping for the best. So what happens next? The future of the Philippines isn't just about war or peace, it's about power shifts, economic leverage, and military gambles. It's about how a small island nation could be the domino that triggers a much larger collapse. So let's break it down. Scenario 1, peaceful de-escalation. This is the ideal outcome. China and the US engage in serious diplomacy, tensions cool down, and the Philippines becomes a buffer state rather than a battleground. What would need to happen for this scenario? China stops expanding its military footprint in the South China Sea. Highly unlikely. The US and China agree on red lines, boundaries that neither will cross. Also unlikely. The Philippines strengthens its own defense without being overly dependent on the US, theoretically possible. But let's be honest, countries don't just back off from strategic territory. It took China 20 years to build its artificial islands and fortify its naval bases. It's not about to abandon them over polite requests. Peace is what diplomats talk about right before things get worse. Scenario 2. Prolonged Cold War standoff. This is where things get interesting. Not a full-blown war, but not peace either. Just a slow, grinding conflict where everyone pushes the limits without crossing the line into open war. China keeps harassing Filipino waters. Chinese coast guards continue ramming Filipino fishing boats. Maritime militias increase operations. Cyber attacks target Philippine infrastructure. The U.S. expands its military footprint. More U.S. bases get established under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. Joint U.S.-Philippine military drills become routine. The Philippines gets upgraded weapon systems like more F-16S and missile defense systems. Meanwhile, the Philippines gets caught in the middle. Foreign investors pull out due to instability. Domestic protests rise over U.S. military presence. Nationalists demand the Philippines stay neutral, but neutrality is a fantasy. This is the most realistic scenario, a dangerous balance of power where neither side makes the first move, but both sides keep escalating tensions until something inevitably goes wrong. Scenario 3. Full-scale war. This is what everyone fears. A single miscalculation that sets off a global chain reaction. So what could trigger an actual war? China invades Taiwan. The most obvious trigger. If the United States intervenes, the Philippines instantly becomes a key battleground, a direct military clash. A Chinese ship fires on a Filipino vessel, a U.S. warship gets hit. Suddenly things spiral out of control. A political shift in Manila. A pro-China government takes power, ejecting the U.S. The U.S. responds aggressively, triggering regional instability. The consequences? The Philippines becomes a major battleground. China blockades key shipping routes, crashing the global economy. The United States faces another proxy war, draining its military resources. The world enters a new era of warfare, where small nations pay the highest price. At the end of the day, this isn't just about the Philippines, it's about a global power struggle playing out in real time. The big questions to ask: will China's expansion ever stop? History says no. Will the United States actually defend the Philippines? It depends on the strategic value at the time. Can the Philippines survive this game of giants? Only if it plays its cards right. So the only real question left is, who will win?